Hello,
Hi, Ryan.
how's it going?
Good. How are you, man?
Good. Uh, just getting some. Yeah, I just finished lunch.
So, how's Hawaii?
Can you hear me? Okay.
No.
Okay. Um, what about now?
Yes.
Okay. Let me figure this out quick. Okay. Good.
All good.
Yeah, nice. Hawaii is beautiful. Have you been to the Big Island?
I have not. I have not. I want to, though.
Yeah. Which have you been to the islands though, or
No.
one of them, or any of them?
No. Traveling wise, Ryan, I'm very not well versed in going a
Hmm.
lot of places. So, probably the farthest I've been is San Juan, probably about 10 years ago, for a friend's
Okay.
wedding. But yeah, that's about the farthest I've been.
Cool. San Juan's beautiful.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But I just want to thank you for taking the time out for being on and sharing your ideas and um, everything that you've got going on. I was looking at your you've got a very impressive resume and a very impressive history. So I was reading through some of your book, Ryan, The Age of Separation, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that, um, if you're up for it.
Sure, sounds good. What would you like to talk about it? Did you actually order the book, or did
So,
you were you reading? Yeah.
so I was just reading little excerpts that I saw, but I am going to order the book probably later on this evening. But I was just leafing through what they had on Amazon as a preview. And I
Mhm.
saw in the first, I think it's the first chapter, you write about your experience at 17 with the diviner's sage. Um, and do you want to tell us a little bit about that and what was going on?
Sure, yeah, that was a very random experience because I had never done any psychedelics or mind altering substances prior, not even cannabis or anything actually.
Mhm.
So, but my friend Ryan at the time had found out that they were selling this stuff called Salvia divinorum, which is called the diviner's sage, and they were selling it legally over the border in New Hampshire, about 20 minutes from where we grew up in Massachusetts.
Mhm.
So he was just like, "Hey, like let's go after school and get some salvia," and I have no idea what it is, so I'm just down to do it because he's my friend, and I just
Yeah.
believe my friends.
Mhm.
So that would probably be lesson number one. At least at that age, I wasn't questioning things as much as I needed to be. But
Uh-huh.
um, from that point on, we went to the store in New Hampshire, picked up the salvia, and went back to my parents' house where like five of my friends were sitting in the basement. My parents were still upstairs. It was like a Wednesday night or something, and basically the salvia you smoke it out of a bowl similar to how you smoke cannabis,
Okay.
and you're supposed to inhale it and then hold it in for as long as you can, kind of like the old school game Chicago, if you've ever played that, where you kind of pass around the joint and try to like hold in the smoke.
Yeah. Right.
So that was yeah, so that was what I did. I was just the first one to hit it, so I took like this massive bowl rip and held it in for as long as I can, and all I knew that I needed to do is to pass the bowl to my left, because that was like the one instruction that I had gotten from my friend was, maybe like just make sure you pass me the bowl, because we've heard that like sometimes people drop it or something. That was about the extent of what I knew I was getting into.
Okay.
Um, Within 30 seconds, my friend directly across from me, his body started opening into like this black portal where his body split in half. And I just started to zoom into this portal. And then I lost direct consciousness. But my friends told me that I stood up and ran directly out of my bedroom door and like into my garage.
Uh-huh.
But while that was happening, visually and physically, what I was feeling was I was walking along this bridge of eyes, and this bridge of eyes was leading me down into this underground chamber. I don't know if you've seen Pan's Labyrinth, the movie,
No.
but it's a really amazing movie by this amazing director. I think it's I forget his name off the top of my head, but he also directed The Shape of Water,
Okay.
and a couple other yeah, couple other really amazing movies. And I was basically led down into this chamber where there was a king and a queen and an empty chair in this like amphitheater in the underworld where I was like welcomed back into this place, and I was completely immersed in this reality for what seemed like timelessness, when realistically it had about 3.5 minutes had passed. And I
Mhm.
was like crawling on my stairs like sideways, trying to like move, when like in my mind's eye I'm in this underground chamber.
Yeah.
And so, soon thereafter my friends like pulled me back because like they heard my parents walking upstairs, and like I basically got pulled back down into my room, and the whole world coalesced in this jigsaw puzzle type of um organization. And then all of a sudden I was just back in my room, and the time on the clock that had passed had been like 6 or 7 minutes.
Oh, wow.
uh, yeah, and that was really my first experience, which a Hawaiian kahuna lady later told me that was the crack where the lights started to come in.
Mhm.
And she said it was actually pretty lucky that like it wasn't a larger crack, basically, is what she said, because
Okay.
those sort of experiences, if there's no eldering or no integration or nobody else who really has experienced that and knows how to hold the space of someone then reintegrating into three-dimensional consciousness from this alternative state, it becomes a little bit hard to like go to health class and take notes, or like go to baseball practice and like field the ground ball. It's like
Yeah.
I was just in eternity in the underworld, welcoming myself back to my king and queen mother, and now I have to go to school,
Yeah.
and like when you don't have people around you. And I think this is one of the things that's really lacking in our society now is an eldership structure that had been in place for thousands and thousands of years of humanity, where people can actually pass down the experiential wisdom and make sure that as people are passing through the gauntlets of the human experience, there's people there who are holding space for them to do so. And it doesn't need to be in a psychedelic realm only. It's just in the human experience in general. And I think that's really important for men and really important for women, and to be exposed to that wisdom, where right now in our society we kind of shovel it off into the senior citizen homes and like isolate our elders,
Yeah.
rather than bring them around the fire with our friends and have them talk about their experience. So
Right, right. Yeah, very, very cool. I myself have not done psychedelics. I've seen a lot of documentaries and I've read a lot of things about it, so I can just imagine um, what your experience was like. But yeah, you kind of alluded to what I wanted to ask you about next is so within this chapter, after you did this little experience, and then you go on to say about playing baseball and not really being, quote, yourself in your body. Is that correct?
yeah, sounds about right.
Okay. So the beginning line of chapter one, you go to say the beginning of the journey towards awakening lies in the realization that we don't really know anything. So, do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Sure, I'd like to first ask you what your thoughts are on that line before I dive into it.
Well, my thoughts are, and I'm not as, I guess, schooled in enlightenment and awakening and things like that as you probably are. But the way I kind of perceive that is that, um, and I've always looked at reality as something that is not what we think it is. So, um, my personal journey towards awakening um, really has shown me that I don't know everything, and I really don't know anything when it comes to the important stuff. So, connection and empathy, and really those things that we should be connecting with. What I think this means in um, general statement um, is that people are kind of focusing on the wrong things in their lives, being whether it's money or fame or something like that, instead of focusing on the things that should matter and gaining wisdom and knowledge on, like connection and togetherness and community and things like that. That's what I would, my personal perception of it would be.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
So you touched on a couple things that I'd like to highlight. The one of them that popped up is kind of using these bimodal words of right and wrong, where I think like if certain people are really entrapped by money or entrapped by fame or entrapped by women or entrapped by any of these what we can call like carnal desires, it's not necessarily that they're wrong, but maybe that's just where the people are on their path. And I think one of the most interesting things that I've begun to learn about awakening is that there's no way to rush or change anyone else's path necessarily, and
Mm,
that you can never actually be off of the path. So let's use someone like Donald Trump, for example.
okay.
He seems to be really motivated by women, like in his Miss Universe pageants, and really motivated by money, hence his like golden hotel and golden toilet thrones and like whatever else he's doing. And he doesn't
Right.
necessarily care about the environment. He's like trying to throw the last wilderness in Alaska up for oil mining. There's all of these things, right? And it's like everyone can point at Donald Trump and say that he is wrong and what he's doing is wrong and he should focus on these specific things in his life. But really, Donald Trump might just be an infant on the path of awakening. He might be someone, and one of my favorite allusions to this is what Ram Dass talks about, which he says that awakening is like a clock, and at midnight we are connected with the divine, and at 12:01 is our fall from grace, which the Bible talks about with Adam and Eve and all these other things, eating from the tree of knowledge, blah blah blah. So basically, from between 12 and 6, people are starting to move through this pathway of desire and accumulating material goods and navigating the world through their senses and like really clinging and grasping and feeling lost and confused, but just kind of fitting in with this consensus reality and this striving mechanism. And then right at about 6:01, right when the hands start to get a little bit closer back towards 12 or the divine, is when you start to feel this inevitable pull. And from that point, even though the entire clock is the path of awakening, because you cannot awaken unless you've been sleeping, but
Mm,
once you started to be pulled back towards the divine, there's no way for you to not be moving that direction. So I think so I think kind of what you touched upon with right and wrong reminds me of this, and it reminds me of the fact that no matter what we're doing at any sort of time, we are never not on the path of awakening.
okay.
Um, the second, and this is just from some random stuff that's pouring out now, but from the second thing, which I think you mentioned first, which is the act of not knowing or feeling immersed in the unknown, and realizing that so many things that you maybe took for granted in your life or habitually were doing, or were navigating the world with these thoughts that there was an emotional charge around certain words or around certain people, and there were a lot of triggers, and there were a lot of this and that, like all of these things. When there is a crack where the light starts to come in, I think that's where we begin to question something, and then realize that that thing is maybe not what we knew, or maybe not what we thought, and then that opens up the realm of possibility that everything is not what we knew.
Mhm.
And what that chapter is talking about, which enlightenment is a demolition process, that's something that focuses on the fact that the pathway to awakening is not about adding more things on to you. There seems to be this movement, especially in like new age spirituality, where people want to be like a Reiki master, or a Pleiadian channel, or they read animal spirit cards, or they do this, or they do that, or they do this, and like they just want it to grab all of these things. And really what that does is just reinforce the strength of the ego. And really what spirituality is lessening the stories that you tell yourself about the world, and those stories are the veils of illusion that you project onto reality as it is. And as you slowly are, and this took me a while to understand, and I really started to get it when I finished my Ashtanga yoga training in India 2 years ago. But it really is about pulling away the roles and the veils of identity that we tell ourselves who we are, as opposed to continually accumulating more and more. And the book, The Age of Separation, is really about how that value system of capitalism, which pins itself to the desire of accumulation, actually is the first stage of disease in Ayurvedic medicine. In the physical body, the first stage of disease is accumulation. But if that same value system of accumulation is being injected into our psyches and into our minds, and we operate in the world always trying to get something more out of every moment, and grasping and extracting things and clinging on to realities, then that's the causation of suffering and the causation of disease.
Mhm.
So basically the book talks about how you can then extricate yourself from this value system to build a bridge of transition, using things like yoga, Ayurveda, indigenous wisdom, psychedelics, Vipassana meditation, and various other techniques like that.
Okay. So, do you think, Ryan, as a society, with with the boom of social media and everybody's taking pictures of everything and everyone, do you think we're missing the bigger picture on a lot of things that we should be focusing on, like living in the moment more, um, not not living on our phones and things like that. Do you think it's kind of toxic to, um, I guess, our journey to enlightenment?
Um, well, even when right now we're on the phones, right? We're in the moment right now, but we're just on the phone.
Right.
So I think really where it starts to come in, and where I've seen it with me, is that it doesn't, like everything is a tool, and it depends on the intention of use. So
Hmm.
if we're using social media with the intention to connect and to bring people back into the moment, or make people think about something, or contemplate, or reflect, or use this tool to actually like channel people's energies or resources to help certain movements around like clean water, or communities that have been flooded, like the Shipibo people currently in Peru, and like all these things, then I think then social media is a tool that's being positive, because people are taking the intention, and the intention itself is something that is harmonious,
Okay.
rather than continually plugging into something and having a disequilibrious nature, which I think social media has the potential to do, because it's literally addicting.
Yeah.
It's similar to cocaine. Or I mean, they did experiments with rats and stuff. We don't really need to like get all into that, but I think, yeah, I think in general You've brought up this term a couple of times, enlightenment, and I'm in no way, shape, or form. I don't believe enlightenment. I don't really think it's like a stage that you get to, like a checkpoint in like a car race. You know, I think it's more of something that is every single moment happening in your life, you're continually being present, and that means not getting pulled off into the future by these thoughts. And if you are, just bring the thought back and become present in the moment, or thinking about things that happened in the past and thinking about regrets and all of these things. Just pull your awareness back into the moment. And I think after a while, the mind starts to empty to a degree where you're not being pulled anywhere, and that's really where you can have true presence, is in that stillness and that silence. And I
Yeah.
think that that's really what the journey of enlightenment is about, is moment by moment, like expanding your wonder by entering into deep states of presence.
Okay. So I'm sure you've read my social media and know that I'm a men's life coach as well as a personal trainer. And so with that, I work with a lot of people um, who they have a very distorted view of themselves. And I try and what one of the things that I try and do is I try to um, there's a whole mind body fitness realm, so yoga and meditation and things like that. And I know that and you've just touched on it, you spent uh, a time in India, I think you said, going through yoga training. So, do you want to tell us a little bit about that? Because I know that I actually looked into becoming a yoga instructor, but at the time I just couldn't make it work. But is there something that kind of led you to um, going through that training, or um, what was going on that led you to going through yoga training and instruction?
Yeah, I met I met the teacher when I was volunteering at Bali Spirit Festival in Indonesia
Okay.
in 2016. And I knew I would study with him because he was the way that he was understanding the breath was something completely different than what everyone else was doing at the festival. And I think there's a time and a place to practice things like holotropic breath work and a lot of these different breathing techniques, but it didn't really sit right with me. And then so I was at this holotropic breathwork workshop, and there was like an hour and a half of like heavy hyperventilated breathing, and people were going into tetany, which is the same sort of symptom that when you get tetanus, like your fingers like freeze up because you're over oxygenated. And
Mm.
um, people were like orgasming and crying and puking and screaming, and I was just like, this is intense, like what's really happening here? And um, I think that we're really obsessed with feeling in the West. Like
Okay.
we feel like we don't, if we don't feel something, like even in sports, right? Like we used to have to stretch a certain amount, and like if you don't really feel the stretch, like you're not doing it enough. Like if you really don't, if you can barely get that last like bench rep up, like now maybe you're starting to like get into some sort of strength building.
Right.
And then the next workshop was this teacher who was just sitting up there completely in like lotus position, like wearing like an orange Indian robe. And he was just so peaceful. And he asked if anyone had any questions before we started pranayama, which is one of the 8 limbs of Ashtanga yoga. It's called breath regulation. And I asked him about what was happening next door at the holotropic breathwork thing, and if what does yoga have to say about that. And he told me that that's the opposite of what you want to do in yoga. Yoga wants you to regulate your breath so that you're barely even breathing, and eventually entering into states of breathlessness where you're in prolonged states of meditation. And
Mhm.
there was like this thing that went off in my mind at that moment, as I mean, I already been traveling for like 4 or 5 years, and I've been living on all these intentional communities in various different places and meeting people who are like just striving to like do all these like crazy far out new things, and then it's like the ancient science of yoga is like do the opposite of this. And I was like, I think I'm going to learn from that guy. And then 3 years later, I had the time to go to Mysuru, which is in the Indian state of Karnataka in the south. And I went and I learned from him for a month, and it was probably one of the most profound months of my life. And I stayed in India longer. I stayed in India for 2 or 3 more months. And it was amazing. And it was not what I thought yoga was. And I think that's really what has changed my mind about a lot of my understanding about yoga. Is it's really the physicality of it, or the asanas, or the physical positions, is only one of the 8 limbs of Ashtanga yoga. So really my understanding of yoga has expanded far beyond the physical. And really what yoga is the practice of reducing the mind modifications, or the imprints that are in the mind that you from witnessing reality as it is. And through the practice of the 8 limbs of yoga, you are able to shed enough layers of yourself to re-enter back into a state of union, which is what yoga means. So that's kind of been my journey with it, and it's brought me into some pretty deep states that have really shifted my understanding about what's happening. And yeah, I'm really grateful for this teacher, Sri Vijay Gopala. His school is called Yoga Gita, and it's in Mysuru. Yeah, he's like one of the most amazing teachers and humans that I've met, probably so far in this lifetime.
That's awesome. I mean, it sounds like a, perfectly, awesome experience. Something that I wouldn't mind taking part in at some point. But for those people who don't know, Ryan, so can you explain what breath work is and what really it's supposed to do other than kind of bring your stress levels down and kind of make you refocus on just your center of being?
So I can't speak really that deeply on non-yogic breath work, because I don't really know that much about. I mean, I've experienced holotropic breath work and like other various things, but I don't consider myself well versed enough to tell people the point about them.
Yeah.
But as far as pranayama, that yogic breathing technique, and there's a couple of them that I work with directly. But my understanding is that in pranayama, one of them is called anuloma viloma, and you're breathing through, like, it's called alternating nostril breathing. And basically what you're doing there is regulating it's these 3 energy lines, the Ida, the Pingala, and the Sushumna. And basically what you're doing is aligning these energy lines and kind of clearing any stuck blockages there, which help you to basically regulate your nervous system. Because the first issue with most people, with the stories that they tell themselves and these veils that they construct, is within the nervous system that creates kind of false flags about the world, and fear arises in situations where it doesn't need to. So this is one thing that pranayama focuses on, is regulating the nervous system, which can then help you move beyond the physical plane. So I guess to move one step deeper, and all of this stuff that I'm going to talk about is pretty philosophical, because yoga is a very deep science. But
absolutely,
there's something in yoga called the pancha koshas, which are the 5 sheaths, and they look like 5 concentric circles coming together. And the outside circle is the physical, or the gross material body. Gross just meaning made of matter. The next one is the breath. The next one is the mind. The next one is wisdom. And the next one is the self, with a capital S. So basically, asana position, that's on the outer realm of the sheath. When you move in through the breath, this pranayama work is bridging the connection between the body and the mind. So the breath is the connection that leads itself into the deeper state, which is to now encounter the mind. And from the mind, you then start to navigate your way eventually into places where the mind is not sullied by all of our belief systems and all of our opinions and all of our definitions and all of our emotional charges and all of our other things that we label the world to be, when the world is just as it is. So slowly the breath brings you deeper and deeper into these states. So at the same time of regulating the nervous system, it's also bringing you deeper into presence and deeper into the contents of your mind.
Awesome, awesome. Um, so I do, I do, and you're right. It is very philosophical, and for somebody who isn't immersed in the things that you are, it's very hard for me to grasp. But as somebody who has went through mind body work and things like that in my schooling, I do understand it. So I do get what you're saying on the base level, I guess. But I wanted to
Mhm.
talk to you and get your thoughts. I do a lot of work with um, men. I am a men's life coach, and I see a lot of guys um, wearing these masks that you were talking about previously. Um, so whether it's a stoic mask or the jock mask or whatever it is, um, it seems like they want to hide their authenticity. Um, and the men that I've talked to, they have a very hard time shedding these masks because this has been their identity up until this point in their lives. Um,
Right. Mhm.
so, so do you, in your experiences with the different things that you have done and the different teachers that you have learned under, um, do you think that there is a disconnect with the men having these masks um, and the I don't know, the situations that have caused them to put themselves in this mask wearing phenomenon that they see them in? What do you think drives this for most men? Because a lot of the people, again, that I talk to, the one response is when I ask them, well, why do you do this? They really can't answer because they don't really know, other than it's the way they've been raised or it's social conditioning or things like that. Um, what do you see is the number one or a couple reasons why we as men do that?
Yeah, I think there's a whole barrage of reasons why, but I think the masks get put on by those who have already worn the masks. So that's kind of what you're talking about through this conditioning. And I don't, it's not only societal conditioning, um, but it's also cultural conditioning. And I think that if your parents and your grandparents operated by the certain paradigms of masculinity, where you weren't supposed to show emotion and you weren't supposed to cry and you weren't supposed to say I love you, and you were always supposed to think that you knew what direction to go in, or you always should have everything figured out. It's like these are all emotional charges attached to the definition of masculinity. So these conditions in themselves then manifest into a way of life, which in most males, I think it's really focusing on logic and pushing away feeling. So most of the feelings and things that men felt, and I know from my experience as a male and as a child who is very sensitive, it's like we're first of all we're told that we really shouldn't be sensitive, but then simultaneously when we are, and then we still have to like hold our head high and throw some dirt on it and make sure that we get shit done. It's like all we're doing is repressing feeling, and the feeling doesn't go anywhere.
Right.
It's like it's not like we can just take the feeling that we have and like go throw it in the trash and the garbage man go takes it to the landfill. It's like
Right.
it's being packaged into our bodies as trauma, and the more that we continually push these things down that make us who we are, like you're saying, this authenticity based on a way that is being misinterpreted about the emotional charge of masculinity, the more that you repress these things and the more that you become disconnected from feeling and more disconnected from your heart is where most people get lost, because everything that we're trying to do, all of the patterns that are arising, they're all rooted in searching for love and wanting to be loved, no matter what it is. It doesn't matter if it's a man trying to be tough or a man trying to be the jock or whatever. It's like, why are you really doing it? You're either doing it for your own self-love or you're doing it to garner the love of another person, which will make you feel loved.
Right.
And it can like really be that simple. So like if we can identify the patterns that we're having as strictly trying to achieve love, but now the stories are no longer matching up with the reality that we're living, then it's kind of like carrying a backpack full of like rotten vegetables that you're never going to eat. It's like you're just carrying around all this weight that's not functional.
Yeah.
So really I think part of it is the misinterpretation of the masculine archetype, which is then bottled up into some societal conditioning that men have to do, and then women simultaneously validate it because they've also been told the same thing on the opposite side, where women, and this is where the feminist movement kind of lashed out, and I don't necessarily think that that's a balanced movement, because, and I can't speak directly because I'm not a woman, but as someone who's working towards a balance between the logos and the eros, or the logic and the feeling, or the masculine and the feminine, like what's really important to do is to achieve internally some inner marriage between the masculine and the feminine.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're able to do that, then you're able to utilize logic and feeling and navigate the world based upon the authenticity of your own sensitivity and its uniqueness, rather than always pushing something away based on a definition that we've been told is and is completely incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that those couple things come to mind. I mean, there's a lot, and each person's situation is probably a little bit unique. But I think overall for men, I think it's most people never really even realize how to process their emotions. Like it's very rare where like growing up someone ever asked me like, how do you feel? It's like, oh, what do you think? Or like, how are you? But no one's ever like, what do you feel? you know
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So, so on the masculinity front, so from what you've observed, is the term masculinity a little bit different, let's say in India, as it would be here in the United States, or do they kind of align in similar ways? So, do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
it's a good question. hmm yeah, I think culturally, and this is one of the things that travel has really helped me with, is culturally there's so many different systems of worldview and so many different. Whoa. So sorry, a banana tree just fell on the roof.
That's okay.
Yeah, there's so many different systems of worldview and interpretations about life, but I think that in general there are some core things that like the masculine energy or archetype like focuses upon, and that's normally things that are focused on like linearity and logic, and there's obviously like a physical strength, and there's there's certain things that the archetype does cross culturally like lend itself to. But I think in other cultures it's not necessarily like it's not clung to as hard, and it's not as boastful or arrogant or aggressive. I think that in the United States in particular, I think a lot of men think that they need to overpower other men to like show their masculinity.
Mm,
And I think that's actually against, at least when I was living in Africa for a long time, like when I would meet the chiefs in these villages, it's like the chief was very, he wasn't soft spoken, but he was always kind of just there as this rooted down tree
mm,
that would just be there in presence, and everything else around him would happen. So it was more of like this passive strength. It wasn't like this aggressive type of strength. And I think that that's really what a true warrior is I think a warrior, and at least in the definitions of of a specific indigenous group in the United States, it's called Ogichidag, which is like the Winona LaDuke actually writes about this in her book, The Demilitarization of Indian Country, which is a really powerful book. She talks about the definition of warrior, and what it is it's the protector of the people and the women and the children and the grandparents and the people who are not able to protect themselves, but it doesn't give anybody the right to harm another person.
mm.
And I think that that's where the masculinity in the Western world gets kind of mixed up, is like we really have this fascination and like just desire to violence and like superheroes and like video games like Grand Theft Auto and like Fortnite and like all of these things, like they're very aggressive and violent, and these men who are like shooting people in the movies are like are brought to these role model statuses and like things that you look up at, and that's not actually what is valued in society, at least in a society that's seeking peace. And I think maybe that's why these things are brought up in our world, is that we're not really seeking peace. Maybe
Right. Yeah.
we're seeking more division and separation and continued imperialism across the world, and therefore we continue to magnify and focus on an aggressive masculine that exerts himself over women like in pornography and dehumanizes them, and like all of these things. Like when you think about all of these masculine archetypes that like we're taught as children, it's like none of them are really truly what the masculine archetype is in a balanced format.
Right. Absolutely. And I totally agree. And I think violence is not the proper masculine form. I think it's kind of what you were saying about um, the chief being the strong, silent type um, is a better way to carry yourself as a man, as a strong-minded, strong-willed, masculine figure. I've always working in a gym. I see this every single day. You see men who size each other up, and they kind of put these smaller guys down because of one thing or the other. It's just it's we in the United States have a very distorted view, in my opinion, as to what masculine values should be. Um, and I think we need to start rewriting our stories of masculine masculine values. Um, but I wanted to actually, you posted something the other day about stories, and the stories that we tell ourselves, you tell yourself. Um, and that kind of being a mirror of what your reality is. So I know the stories I tell myself every single day. They're usually, I want to help people, and I want to, broadcast my message to the world and blah, 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 and things like that. And I'm a very emotional when I meet with people and speak my truth to people. Um, what are you passionate about, Ryan? I kind of already know, and people who listen to this, it kind of already get the gist of where you're coming from. What do you tell yourself every day in ways of storytelling, and how does that mirror in your waking life, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I guess when you said those are the stories that you tell yourself, you want to help people and share your message with the world. I don't know if those are really stories.
And I didn't want to like go in too deep. I kind of wanted to get um, your views on storytelling and realities and things like that. Those are just things that I tell myself every single day.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so I'm trying to remember that post in particular. I think that I think it was about so the stories that we tell ourselves are is this the one that said the stories that we tell ourselves are the veils of illusion
Yes, yes.
that okay. Yeah, so basically those stories I think are a lot more subtle than what I want to do, for example, or what brings me passion or joy. I think that that post in particular is more about when our mind takes itself into a present circumstance using a story of a past circumstance and then automatically renders a reaction to a circumstance that is not warranted because of the past story.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, let's say that I was bullied as a child, which
Mm-hmm.
I was for many years. And let's say that I'm now with a friend of mine at a cafe, and he like cracks like a sarcastic joke at me or something. And immediately, let's say that there's a visceral reaction to like that he is a bully and I need to defend myself, and like all of these other things are coming up. Even though he is my friend and that he has like maybe my best interest in mind, it's like the story is not, it's not matching. Like there's basically a dissonance between the current reality and what's happened in the past. And basically in yoga they call these the imprints. So the imprint of the story of being bullied is still rendering my reality to this day,
Mm-hmm.
because I'll react to certain people in certain ways based on past things that are no longer warranted now. So I think that that's kind of more about what the post is about. And it really happens on like these very subtle levels. It can be the stories that you tell yourself about your parents, or the stories you tell yourself about money, or the stories that you tell yourself about how many orgasms you have to give your partner, or the stories you tell yourself about whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's like if these things are not matching the reality of where you are, then they're completely fabricated.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of what we tell ourselves is a story. Um, so that's going to be a little different than the second question, which is what kind of gets me fired up and passionate. I think there's a lot of different things. And one of them is what I'm doing here right now in Hawaii, which is like working with the land and like basically 15, 20 hours a week. We're out here planting, growing, harvesting, and processing food, from turmeric to ulu breadfruit to different types of citrus to papayas to coconuts to everything, like digging the gardens, planting, weeding, doing everything that needs to be done. I think that that's one thing that really lights my fire is food sovereignty and food security, and actually working with the land and understanding the entire process that goes into our food, because we are just in a rampant food wasting society, and people who have no idea like what even a tomato plant looks like, but they eat tomatoes every single day on their burgers.
Right.
So I think like like the disconnection that's happening in our society between food, which is our nourishment, um, and the fact that no one really seems to know or understand where it comes from. Never mind, like nobody kills their animals anymore, very rarely, unless you're a hunter, you know. And we live in a society that slaughters millions and millions of animals per year to feed this insatiable hunger for meat. It's like, if you actually killed a chicken or a goat or a cow, like you're not going to want to do that as much, you know. You're not
Right.
going to want to eat meat as much when you really feel how deep that process is. So one thing that really makes me passionate is food and the processes around food. Second one is sustainability. I've basically, from the point that I was 22 until now, like on and off, I've traveled around the world doing international grassroots sustainability, living in Cameroon, Africa, living in Myanmar, or some people call it Burma, living in Nicaragua, living in Cuba, living in Hawaii, living in the Dominican Republic, living in Australia, all of these places doing international development work, working with things around plastic remediation, with renewable energy, with land conservation, with wildlife conservation, with capacity building and skills building for people, rural infrastructure, finding cool technologies to bridge gaps between existing businesses and actually what's happening in the world, and whether it's truly sustainable or whether it's just a buzzword that someone uses to sell more products. And I'm genuinely interested in working with businesses and people who want to attain true sustainability in their personal or organizational life, and who aren't really encapsulated by the buzzword of it. Because I think one of our biggest problems as a society is being trapped in concepts rather than the integration of the concept and the experiential living of it. So that would be another thing that makes me passionate, is sustainability. Um, and the third thing that I'll mention is, I guess, just like kind of writing and poetry and being in the world. It doesn't seem like a passion necessarily, but it's kind of just how I transmute information. It's like I'll be in nature, I'll be at the ocean, or I'll be reading something, or I'll be doing something, and then information will come through and it will just come out in a poem.
Mhm.
Uh, so writing is something that is very cathartic for me, and something that continually is an outlet of creativity that I have begun pairing up with guitar as well, to start to like bridge the gap between the poetry and music. So those are a couple of things that make me passionate.
Awesome. Yeah, I am right there with you with the writing and journaling. It definitely is a stress reliever for myself, and a way to convey ideas that I'm having about certain things that are going on in my life or in the worldview and things like that. But
Yeah.
if somebody wanted to research how to um, start with researching sustainability or how we can help our food supplies, what would you say to them, or how where would you guide them?
Yeah, well, at first, if anyone does want to have a conversation about these things, I've actually developed a couple different programs that I'm now beginning to share with people on specific leadership techniques that integrate a multidimensional approach to true sustainability that incorporates food security and all of these other things that I've talked about. So I am always open for people to reach out to me if they're interested more. But I think something that is very simple, and we seem to have the most difficult times doing simple things because we live in such a complex world that's in the mind.
Mhm.
But I think it's just going out and like volunteering or working with a farmer. It's like something as simple as that will really like put you in touch with the amount of work and toil that you need to go into with the land, and like how you can build a relationship with the rhythms of nature. And I think something like that is very simple but very profound. And I think that simultaneously that will teach you about sustainability,
Mhm.
because nature's packaging is absolutely perfect. A banana falls from the tree and the skin is composted immediately, or there's bugs or insects or mushrooms that sit on the precipice of the transition between life and death. and everything is perfectly recycled back into each other, and that's the true definition of sustainability. Like a hunting tribe in Papua New Guinea is sustainable. It's not an underwear brand that says that they're sustainable.
Right.
So it's really like, it's really just kind of honing in on simplicity and being able to then humble yourself to enter into the simplicity of working with nature. And I think that that's really gonna teach people the most if they really go into it with an open mind and an open heart. But
Right.
yeah, other than that, I mean, there's various techniques and things that you can learn, and I'm always open to share those things. And um, yeah, I've just kind of experienced it through my life. I didn't know that I was going to travel around the world for 9 years and do international grassroots development and work for renewable energy in like Southeast Asia and Hawaii and various places. But it just kind of is where my life led me, and
Yeah.
uh, it's been quite a learning experience. So
Yeah, I'm sure. So what kind of got you started doing this? So this obviously wasn't the original plan then.
yeah, I mean, I studied finance
Yeah.
in at Northeastern in Boston, and then a professor and a mutual friend of one of my best friends and I was going over to Cameroon, Africa in 2012 to work with farming confederations to cut down on food waste. And I just finished school in Valencia in Spain, and that was like my last classes. So I was like, oh, I'd love to go and like check out what you're doing and help in any way that I can. So from there, I just took off to Cameroon and lived in this farming village for about 8 months.
Mhm.
Um, and that just completely transformed my whole world.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. Wow.
Yeah. So that was kind of so that was kind of how it got launched. It's like I was probably going to go work for like a tech company or something, and then I just went over to Cameroon and lived in a farming village and like got my water from the stream and took bucket showers and killed my own chickens and was riding on the back of motorcycles down muddy rural roads to go drink palm wine and learn about farmers, about their hardships, and share my experience and see how we could help them. And then I was like, oh my God, like this is where my skill set belongs, you know? So I just kind of took off from there and continued doing that sort of work.
Yeah. So back to yoga for a minute. So, and I know you kind of said before you were a sensitive kid. So, were you always kind of in tune with, um, I guess, yourself and, um, trying to stay calm, or was that something that happened later?
Definitely later.
So, so obviously, when you were 17, that when things kind of started happening in that way.
Well, I mean, there was always something there
Yeah.
that I knew, but like similar to what we're talking about, right? With the masculinity being like altered or repressed, like the people who were being bullied were like the artists and the poets and the musicians and the people who weren't like jocks in the school that I was at, and like growing up, and like my parents wanted me to be a jock and play sports, and so their projected reality came onto me, and then I started to live into that because I didn't want to be bullied. And now all of a sudden the sensitivity and ability to like create in different ways is being pushed away because I'm afraid of being hurt,
Yeah.
or I'm trying to fit in. So that kind of continued probably up until like I mean really like sophomore year of college, and then yeah, everything just started to shift like deeper that I got into to psychedelics. Really, like that was probably the first exposure to LSD and like mushrooms and various things like this, and it just showed me like when I was with those people who I was basically pretending to be friends with because of various different like social norms, it's like this is not what I'm interested in at all. Like what, I can't continue to lie to myself anymore. Like this isn't what I want to do at all. um so I think the experience when I was 17 was kind of a catalyst that
Mm.
then opened me up to like work with these other substances as allies. And then from that point, it just freed me up to like start to untether myself from a lot of the societal conditioning that had suppressed my internal creativity and authenticity in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. So I ask everybody that I interview this question, and this is usually the ending question. So think hard before you answer. So if you could talk to your younger self and give them three pieces of advice or things that they would be expecting in the future or things that would help them, what would you tell your younger self?
Yeah. First one would be have no expectations. Uh, the second one would be don't worry about what other people say or are doing. You are a unique individual and follow what brings you joy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so those would probably be the first two. And then the third one I think would be take your time and don't rush. Because I think one thing that I'm learning is and have been practicing over the last many years is being slowing down. And I think rushing is a form of resistance because it makes us want to escape the present moment if we're not content. And really what rushing is doing is just moving us through our lives, and we're not really picking up on the subtlety and deepening our presence. And so I think if I were to tell my younger self three things, it would be slow down would be a very important one, and take your time, because life is a long journey, and it's not even linear in any way, shape, or form. So just because other people are striving and driving their cars around the board game of life doesn't mean that like you have to do that simultaneously.
Yeah,
um yeah, so I think those would be my three things.
awesome, awesome. Well, Ryan, I want to thank you again for taking time out um, to have a chat about your incredible work over there in Hawaii and elsewhere in the world. And your book is out now on Amazon, that's correct?
Yep. Yeah, there's four books.
Okay.
There's The Age of Separation, there's a poetry book called Returning Home, and there's two children's books about Buddhism that I've also written up there.
Awesome, awesome. So I will definitely be buying The Age of Separation. I think it's I
Thank
think
you.
it, yeah, absolutely. I think it's a very interesting book. At least what I've read of it and what I've heard you speak on it this evening. But again, thank you very much, Ryan. And
Thank you.
absolutely, and keep in touch. Okay.
Okay, aloha.
All right. Aloha.
Bye.